Lingua Brutalica is a podcast that uses ethnographic interviews to study language use in the extreme metal community. We are studying a music scene known for its love of themes and topics generally considered offensive, and it is likely that some episodes will touch on topics or opinions some listeners may find tasteless or ethically problematic. Ethnographic researchers aim to adopt the interviewee's point of view so that we can draw out and study the attitudes, beliefs, and practices that are important to them. We want to make it clear that in presenting these conversations here, we do not endorse any of their content. Our aim is to explore the thought processes behind language use in this long-running, international, and yet understudied scene. Hi, and welcome back to Lingua Brutalica with me, Jess Crook, and my co-host, Wes Robertson.
Hello.
With us today is Chaney Crabb of Entheos. Thanks for making the time to chat.
Yeah, thanks for having me, you guys. I'm excited to dive into the world of lyrics with you.
We're excited to have you.
Yeah, stoked. Awesome. So to start off, how would you describe Entheos's music? What kind of like metal genre would you say it falls under?
I guess to make things short and sweet, I would call us progressive death metal. You could go in a lot of ways with that. We've got like elements of jazz and grunge and rock, and it goes in a million ways, but just to nicely package it, we say progressive death metal.
So how did you get into the style of music that Entheos makes? Like when you were first getting into metal music, did you start with the kind of progressive death metal, or did you move in through another pathway?
No, I started playing metal when I was probably 13, and it was through nu metal. That's what was really popping off when I was a kid. So I just kind of went to a bunch of local shows and found my way into death metal and the early stages of deathcore, like 2005 deathcore, which is different than it is now.
Sure.
And through that, I got into bands like The Faceless and Veil of Maya. And then I got into way more progressive death metal like Opeth. And, I just kind of went down the rabbit hole. So that's how I got into all of that stuff, really.
Did you have like a guide at all? Or did you do all this kind of just finding it out yourself and jumping through? Like, because, 2005 with the internet connections and stuff like that wasn't as, there wasn't like metal Twitter and all that. How did you find your way through that passage?
Back then it was just friends showing me music, and because I was in bands basically my entire life, I always had friends around me who were into the kind of music that I was into. And inevitably you come across people who are into a more niche style of metal, and I have friends who have gotten me into post rock and hardcore and all of that stuff. So it was just through playing music and through being obsessed with music. That's one of the coolest parts about being around musicians all the time, is that they're introducing you to new cool stuff to listen to.
And is there anything in particular that kind of drew you to prog specifically? Like you said that you kind of eventually went through kind of death metal into prog. Was there anything about like prog music or lyrics that really appealed to you?
Oh yeah, the lyrical content. Like prog lyrics are super, they're concept albums and they can be trippy and wild, and not necessarily focused on like the tropes of death metal, like killing and pillaging and destruction or politics. They're a little more cerebral, the topics in progressive metal. So I've always been into that. That drew me into it. And just the spaciness of the music. I don't know, maybe it's because I'm a stoner, but I like listening to spacey music. And that's just, and it's super melancholy as well. That's something that I really seek in the music that I listen to. So all of those elements brought me into it.
So when you first encountered just straight up, like death metal, did you feel that the kind of killing, murder, pillaging stuff wasn't for you right away, or did it have a different effect when you first heard it?
I knew I've never been against it. Some of my favorite bands talk about that type of stuff. I love Cannibal Corpse. I love Dying Fetus. All of that stuff I love. But as far as the lyrical content goes, I just know that as a lyricist, I can't relate to any of that. And I very much am the type of person who likes to get on stage and feel the emotion of what I'm saying and feel like it's actually truly coming from my heart. And so I just, as a lyricist, I wasn't drawn to that type of stuff. I joined a band, a local band in Iowa called From Citizen to Soldier. And a lot of their lyrics were political and about that kind of stuff. And when I went through and kind of rewrote their material because I knew that I didn't want to sing. I couldn't passionately sing about that type of stuff. So I did know pretty early on for sure.
And I suppose given that you've just said that, like, you know, prog lyrics tend to be a lot more kind of like cerebral or abstract as opposed to, you know, the kind of like gore violence lyrics that we typically see in, like, you know, your death metals and that kind of thing. Do you think then that like prog metal lyrics are still kind of recognizably metal? Like, you know, could you distinguish like prog lyrics from, I don't know, like alt rock lyrics?
Sometimes not. Sometimes you definitely can't distinguish them. Yeah. And I find there to be a lot of similarities between the two things, between like alternative stuff. And I'm very drawn to those kind of lyrics too. It's like, even as far as bands like Death Cab for Cutie goes, that's one of my favorite bands. Ben Gibbard is like one of my favorite lyricists of all time. And really, if you took some Death Cab lyrics, you could throw them right into a progressive metal album and they would fit perfectly. So yeah, I don't think that there's necessarily a huge way to differentiate between those. Sometimes it just depends, you know. I couldn't put a blanket statement over the whole entire genre of prog, but a lot of the time, no.
I guess for the opposite side, have you ever listened to a song in the kind of the prog metal genre that you really vibe with, and then you checked out the lyrics and you didn't enjoy them because they weren't good or weren't, I guess, didn't feel appropriate to metal in a way?
No,
not
really. I don't think I've ever checked anything out lyrically that I thought didn't fit. I don't think metal is like a one size fits all thing. I don't really look at it that way. So honestly, anything can fit within the genre, truly.
So even like I don't know, songs about cute things would work.
I mean, it depends how far you want to take that, because there are parody videos of people making metal songs with cute lyrics. So I guess it just depends, you know, how far your scope of metal, what we're allowing to be considered metal. Are we against like stuff that's not true metal? Because if we aren't against that, then anything, you know, Psycho Stick has songs about like beer is good and a bunch of satirical stuff, and that's metal. So I mean, anything can be, really.
Would it be weird though if it was like a sincere, like, you know, song about like, I don't know, a meet cute or something like that? Like, would that be out of place?
I don't know. I'd have to hear it.
Okay, yeah.
Okay.
I'd have to judge it. I see what you're getting at for sure. That what it would do is cross the line of cheesiness, which is something that I'm not really into with lyrics. But I don't know if I would be like, this does not belong in metal.
Because Psycho Stick position themselves as like comedy, right?
Totally.
Whereas like if Opeth had, you know, the Grand Conjuration, like the Grand Fluffy Bunny, and they sang about, you know, like a cat cafe or something, would that, I mean, like,
I see what you mean.
Cadence doesn't change, right? Cadence doesn't change, music doesn't change, but what he's saying is about like a trip to, you know, pet a cat. Would that affect the song in a way?
For Opeth, yeah, probably.
Okay.
For sure.
Okay.
But it's a band by band thing, because I would also say that like a band like Ghost, they can kind of stretch the scope of like what's silly and what's not, you know, like that whole musical, the Rats thing. And I mean,
so
it really just depends. on the band.
Okay.
My band, for my band, I don't think it would fit at all.
Okay.
So I'm not going to be doing it. But
well, talking of your band, when did you start writing lyrics?
I started writing lyrics when I was probably 12.
Okay.
I have like notebooks that I still have in a chest that my dad made of just lyrics on lyrics. I used to write all the time when I was a kid. Granted, they were extremely juvenile and like not great lyrics, but I was trying, that's for sure. So I've been writing for a long time.
Were they metal lyrics?
They were metal lyrics, yeah, for sure.
So like you don't have to like give examples of stuff you wrote when you're 12, but if you were to compare, like what is there a difference into how you approach like writing for a metal song back then compared to now in terms of like the basic fundamentals of what words you're going to use or how you're going to tackle this task?
Oh yeah, I mean a lot has changed as I've evolved as a songwriter, but and back then I wasn't writing to songs per se. I was just like writing poetry as if it was metal lyrics. So a lot has changed. But the overall vibe, strangely enough, hasn't changed. Like my mom sent me a poem that I wrote when I was that young, and it was something about death being beautiful. And I can't remember the other lyrics on it, but it's like, overall, I still sort of write in that kind of melancholy way. So that part of me hasn't changed much.
Interesting. So I guess broadly speaking, there's always been the kind of clash in metal is, are the lyrics meant to be kind of personal or are the lyrics meant to be kind of entertainment? Going back to the Cannibal Corpse thing versus, writing. Given that your background is kind of in that poetry, would you say that your lyrics have always been more about like yourself and your feelings, or do you also try to have kind of an entertainment approach to how you produce kind of a song's themes?
No, it's always been about me or about things that I'm going through. Granted, it's not always completely literal. It's always seen through kind of that prog scope, I guess. But I don't ever write anything that's theatrical. That's just not my shtick, really.
We've had a few people talk to us before that also kind of mentioned that they like to be personal, but we've also wondered, like, when you go back to a song that you've written 2-3 albums ago, is it sometimes hard to get back into the space you were when writing that song? Like, are there any songs you don't feel like performing anymore because you can't identify with the space you were in when you wrote those lyrics about, yourself?
Yeah, I mean, I can't really identify with performing our songs off of our EP or off of our first full length just because I mean, first of all, I just don't feel like they were fully thought out lyrics, like well thought out and well done lyrics. And that more so prevents me from wanting to do them than that I don't relate. It's just that, I'm sort of a perfectionist and I self-audit a lot. So just knowing that my lyrical content is better and more well written now really prevents me from wanting to play that stuff live, but I still will. I think that, a lot of the time with metal, it's more about the voice being there than the lyrical content mattering in a live basis or in a live setting. So I'm still okay with playing them, but I don't really want to go back and listen to them very much.
On the kind of inverse of that, is it ever difficult to put something personal into something that, potentially millions of people will hear?
No, not at all. That is the stuff that resonates the most with me when I'm, performing it for an album and then performing it in a live setting. So to me, that's the easiest thing to put out there because that's the thing that I most emotionally connect to. And I want to emotionally connect with my music because I think that also helps other people connect with it emotionally. So, no, I've never had a problem with that. It comes pretty naturally to me, I think.
How about in terms of like how you communicate, like, the context behind the songs to, like, for instance, your bandmates? Like, do you give them like just kind of a general like idea of like the kind of concept behind like lyrics for a given song, or do you like, how much information do you give typically, especially if it is like kind of a personal basis?
Yeah. So Naveen, who is like the main songwriter of my band, he's really the other member of the band. He's my fiance. So I pretty much tell him everything, every little detail about what it's about. We go really in depth with that stuff. So he's very, very aware. My other bandmates, I don't really explain in detail unless they ask me. But yeah, with him, he knows everything. And he's the one writing the music. So I think that it transfers into what he's creating as well. And we kind of, work together in that way.
Do the skeletons of the songs usually come first, or have you written lyrics for songs that don't exist yet?
Usually, so I have written lyrics for songs that don't exist yet, but usually what ends up happening is that if I do use those lyrics, once I'm putting patterns together and listening to the music, it becomes like an amalgamation of a bunch of different things that fit together. So it just, because in metal, we're really focused on like phrasing, and a lot of the time patterns, you want to fit a lot of words into a little space. So you have to sacrifice certain aspects of sentences and words. So writing a bunch of lyrics before we write a song doesn't really work a lot of the time, sometimes, but.
And has your kind of conception of like the lyrical content for a song ever kind of conflicted with what Naveen had in mind for a song?
No. Never.
Okay.
Yeah, never.
So has he ever like come up with like concepts for the song when he's like written it, or is it usually just like, this is a song, like you kind of like write whatever you feel is suitable?
Yeah, it's always been pretty much agreed upon that I'm the lyricist and he's the songwriter, and that's just how it goes. But luckily, while he's writing songs, I'm there, and while I'm writing lyrics, he's there. So he tracks the vocals, so it's like it's very much Naveen and I going back and forth on everything. And I will ask him when I'm in the studio, does this line sound good? Should I phrase it another way? So it does, there is a partnership in both the music and the vocal writing, for sure. But yeah, no, neither of us really object to each other's ideas very much. We're pretty much on the same page.
Cool. Well, with that kind of set up, then I think we like to go into asking about sort of the specific lyrical content. And we wanted to start by looking at some tendencies across the first three albums in terms of both similarities and discrepancies. The first being something that was kind of striking to us is a change in style that we noticed across the three releases. In that on your first album, you have kind of what I guess we could call a disjointed style, and that the lines kind of tell a story, but individually they're somewhat staccato. Like they punctuate without direct grammatical links to each other. As in the start of The Infinite Nothing, you say, full sets of decaying teeth, skin sunken and thin, dying like an art, navigating so carefully, the sun becomes the sign of a solemn separation and the sleep. Or on Terminal Stages of Nostalgia, conversation dilutes, your mind wanders easily, catch your balance, fever dreams. This style seemed to decrease on the second release. And now on the third one, you kind of have paragraphs that connect, as in lines like, and here with all life before my eyes, boundless and limitless, what I would hope to be, if not everything. Sorry, what would I hope to be, if not everything? I found a place no one can reach, and there is no return, where they kind of link as a entire sentence almost. Is this cohesive, I guess, if we call it style, something that you have noticed in your writing? And if so, kind of what brought about this change from the more sort of disjointed lines that came on the more earlier releases?
Yeah, absolutely. That goes back to like what I said about self-auditing a lot. So I've gone through my lyrics many times, and I try to figure out ways to make them more, they're never going to be completely literal, but I want them to be able to be connected with and understood in a way that I don't think that the like staccato line delivery was doing as much as I am doing now. So that is a huge goal of mine, to continue in that way. I like doing that. I like writing in that style. So yeah, I did. It was something that I have tried to improve over the years, for sure.
Is there kind of a fundamental irony in seeking accessibility within extreme metal?
I don't know. I mean, I guess some people would say so, but I've never found it to be that way, really. I think that everyone sort of wants to be understood to an extent. So it's natural to do that, to not necessarily seek accessibility, but seek for other people to be able to relate and understand to where you're coming from.
Would it be like disappointing to you if, I suppose, listeners like weren't able to kind of access like the ideas or concepts behind like lyrics?
No, because one of my favorite things to do with my best friend when I was a kid was drive around and latch on to lines out of our favorite songs. And we would seriously just drive around the country roads outside of Des Moines and try to decipher what the lyricist was trying to say. So that's like ingrained in me, that people will run no matter what. I can get on this program and a bunch of people can hear the lyrics, but at the end of the day, they're going to take lines out of the songs and they're going to apply them to their own lives. So that, honestly, to me, is a great gift when people do that. I've had people come back to me, repeat lyrics to me, and tell me what it meant to them. And it may be a million miles off from what the lyrics are supposed to be about, but it means something to them. And that is really the important thing to me in what we're talking about, like seeking the accessibility. I just want people to be able to take aspects of my lyrics and relate them to their own lives.
So if someone quote unquote misinterprets a song that you wrote that was very, very personal to you, you're okay with that because they're taking it in their own way?
Absolutely. 100%.
What if it's like exactly 180 degrees?
I guess, well, what would that mean?
Like you wrote a song about, I don't know, like overcoming hardship, and they're like, I like how this song is about wallowing in hardship.
I'm okay with that, as long as we're not talking. I'm okay with it. You know, that's just how the world is. Like, no one even, if I asked someone else to describe me as I am, they're never going to describe me to me the way that I see myself. So how can I really expect that out of people who listen to my music and read the lyrics that I write?
Well, I suppose this is kind of a broader question that we've like tackled somewhat like occasionally on the podcast, is like, you know, to what degree do like artists have ownership over the interpretation of songs, and like to what degree do they have responsibility for listeners' interpretation of the songs? And it seems like from what you're saying is that like, you know, once it's kind of out there, then it's really up to the listeners as to like how they'll kind of take it and apply it. Is that more or less your view?
The way that I view making an album is that right now the album belongs to me because it hasn't been released. There are three songs that don't really belong to us anymore because they're singles and they're out there in the world. But once the record is out, it really doesn't belong to us anymore. It belongs to us in the sense that we're going to play it live. It's our song and we're credited with that. But beyond that, like any interpretation or any love that anyone finds for it, it's not mine anymore. It's theirs.
Well, talking further about kind of patterns that we've observed across your albums, one thing that we did notice in terms of like kind of similarity and consistency is repetition of lines across songs. So for instance, Language, Guide Me, Allow the Words to Shed Light and Consume Me appears on the first two tracks of 2016's The Infinite Nothing. And I Begin Questioning the Very Things I've Come to Be appear on tracks 2 and 3 of your new album. And the track The Sinking Sun ends with a line, Time Will Take Us All, which is the name of the track that follows it. So what is the goal of this repetition of lines across kind of new contexts? And how do you decide which lines are good enough to appear on more than one song?
A lot of the time it has to do with what's going on musically. Sometimes when I repeat stuff, it will be like because the same musical part is happening again later on the record. But really, I guess I've just always had fun with putting those kind of Easter eggs around albums and seeing if people catch on to them. And when they do, it's like the coolest thing ever because I can tell that they're really paying attention. We do that with I thought today, I was like, I wish that I would have sent you guys the album because the album does that a lot too. We like to do that musically. We like to have. Naveen was making me fun of me earlier because I was referring to it as a motif, which it is technically a motif, but that's the nerdy way to say it. But there are motifs that repeat throughout our entire album, and they're fun like things that happen over and over again. And I guess that for us, that's just like a part of the prog.
A part of the prog. Okay.
It's all a part of the prog.
Is it something that like you can only do is that like, am I reading into this too much? Is it something you can only kind of do in prog? Like
no, that's reading into it too much. I think that really it's just something that we think is cool. Like when we find things like that on albums that we love. So yeah, that's really where it comes from.
Well, how do you decide which lines are cool enough or good enough to appear more than once on an album?
Yeah, that was I don't really know how to answer that. I don't know. I guess it's just what I feel the lyrics call for. I never see a line and say, wow, that's like the best line I've ever written. That one needs to be repeated 3 times. But if I have the same feeling again, like on the new album, there's a whole part from the Interior Wilderness that repeats again in Darkest Day, which is taking back I can't think of the lyrics off the top of my head, but it's like your kingdom is crumbling down, but in the first time it's me, like my conscience talking to me, and the second time it's me saying that to a friend. So yeah, I don't really know how I decide. Thanks for asking me though, because now I'm going to think about that a lot more.
I mean, does it have anything to do with like the overall kind of like thesis of a given like song or series of songs on an album? Like, do those kind of lines help highlight like a kind of core idea or anything?
Well, definitely. Just like in what I just said, like, the lines I think in the first song mean something different than they mean in the second song, but they can be said in the exact same way. So yeah, for sure.
So another kind of common thing we noted was that on all of your albums, you often use the first person perspective, but there has been a rather marked increase in this use over time. So on your first album, you used the word I 31 times, which is 3.875 per song on average. Not a small amount, but there are 90 uses of I in your second, which is an average of 9 per song. And there are 119 uses of I, which is an average of 11.9 per song on the new album. First and foremost, generally speaking, is this I you, and has it always been you? Like, is the I in a line such as I have witnessed the radiance of the sun and I know that I am the one with the illusion from 2016, the same I as it was just like a dream I had when I was young, the earth birthed the mirror, I opened my eyes and my future appeared from the newest release?
Yeah, it's always me, for sure.
Well, then, did you notice the increased use of I, or are you somewhat surprised that it's gone up over 3 times in frequency over the course of your albums?
I'm incredibly surprised, and I wonder. I've been thinking about this because I knew that we were going to talk tonight, and I wonder if it's just because I've become far more confident in my role in the band over time, and hearing that makes me wonder if that is why I've used the word I even more. Like I'm finally feeling like I've stepped into the role full time, and that's why I feel comfortable doing that. That's really fascinating to me.
Well, one thing we noticed as well is based on the single that you've released. This album is the first Entheos record to feature your own clean vocals. So did you notice differences in how you approach language use when kind of singing versus, quote unquote screaming? Like, does it affect this usage of I, do you think?
I don't know if that affects the usage of I. However, there are differences in it. In singing, you can sort of fit words in a different way. Whereas in screaming, you're really focused on like patterns. And I like to write staccatoed patterns a lot. And, syllables become a huge issue. If you go under syllable, it can sound strange. If you go over syllable, it can sound strange. So you're kind of in these constraints of making the pattern as good as it can be. And then language is brought in. But with singing, you can almost just write whatever you want and fit it in. It's not, you don't have to be so focused on all of those things in the same way. So that definitely changed in those singing parts.
You mentioned earlier that you've never had any problem kind of, singing about yourself and putting your own experiences into songs, but is there any difference in putting yourself out there when the lyrics aren't, guttural screams? Like when people can understand what you're saying without the lyric book, does that make it a little scarier at all or change how you approach it?
It doesn't change how I approach it. It did make it a little scarier. I felt a little more naked doing that. And I feel like don't get me wrong, I like agonized over my lyrics for a long time. I'll go back and edit, rewrite. But for that song, I found myself doing it a lot. And I definitely think it was because the words were a little more clear. So yeah, it was interesting how that worked.
Is there anything in particular that you recall editing?
Yeah, in the chorus, which I guess isn't fully singing, there's a part where I say, it's like in my head, like a void lost in the lapse of time. You are the calm, I am the world on fire. I can feel the sunlight draining us all. Every day is nothing but a death to me. The putting every day is nothing but a death to me felt so weird to me in like a more understood lyric. I don't know why. I guess I didn't end up changing it in the long run. I rolled with it because I did like it, but for some reason that passage just stuck out to me. I don't know, it was weird.
And if it had been screamed, do you think you wouldn't have given it kind of a second thought kind of thing?
Yeah, I think I wouldn't have cared as much.
What brought about like the challenge of clean vocals in this one?
Clean vocals, that's something I've always wanted to put in the band. I was a singer before I was a screamer. I just hadn't really found the song to do it in yet. And with just me and Naveen writing together, I wanted him to write some stuff that like fit that style. And we didn't want to write the kind of metal song where you're just throwing singing in there just to have it and it doesn't really fit at all. So everything that we wrote was with singing in mind. Like we knew that I was going to sing on that song.
Oh, so you like before you even started writing, you approached and said, I would like to have some riffs that could, feature clean singing. And
absolutely. I mean, I'm really into like doom and post rock and Chelsea Wolf and Emma Ruth Rundle and all of that type of stuff. And I want to find a way to incorporate that into like progressive technical metal. So that's really where I want to go with it.
So we talked about your use of I in songs, but we also saw that the albums do seem to become more kind of inclusive over time as well in their use of like, we and us. So the first album uses these two words, 10 and 2 times respectively, and then 21 and 13 times on the second, so 21 for we, 13 for us, and there's 16 we's and 15 us's on the third release. So what do you think might have brought about this change? And was this kind of intentional to include, for instance, the listener in lines like "we weren't meant to be saved"?
I don't know. No, I have no, in this case, I have no idea why that changed. And I haven't even thought about it until this moment. But in that particular line, it was almost like in Absolute Zero, it was kind of me speaking to myself. So it was like the we was me and me.
Okay.
Yeah. Does that make sense? Like it's a part of the song is me, and a part of the song is like me speaking to myself and about how I feel about the way that I'm approaching life. So the we in that case was me.
Are there we's and us that is like, I mean, when in other cases, is it everyone? Is it people listening to the album? Is it? Oh, it's okay.
Yeah. In other cases, it's usually all inclusive, like all of us. But in that specific song, it was me speaking to me.
Okay. Well, what about then the use of you? Because initially in your lyrics, you started by rarely using this word. There's only 8 uses on your first album and 7 on your second. So actually a decrease. But the word you appears 26 times on your newest album. So to kind of repeat this 2-part style question we've been doing, first, kind of who is this you? Like when you ask questions, say, if you take it all away, flesh and bone and blood, what is it that you will have to give? Is this directed towards the listener? Or lines like, I cling to the thought of who you were, I speak to them in dreams, directed at a specific person?
The first one is directed at the listener for sure. And it's kind of asking the question of, when you die, who is the person, who is the soul that exists? Like what is the core you? And in the second, that was actually a song that was directed at a person, and it's about them as you. But I feel like in all of these instances, I very much write so that the you could apply to anyone. If you read it, you could be the you, no matter how I intended it.
What if it's like really angry? Like we've had this conversation with some other artists that talk about you as in the traditional I stab you, I kill you, I maim you. And when you're on stage, right? If you have a song that's written about someone that you were angry at and you're singing it and you're looking at a fan right in the eyes, is there something odd there? Like what if the you is directed at somebody that you're not happy with and a fan puts them in that position? What happens then?
I never really think about that. I guess at that moment, it's the fan. The you is the fan. And you sort of detach in a way in a live show from certain lyrical things. It just depends. But yeah, it's them in that moment. They're not the horrible person, but it's you.
They're on the receiving end of it though.
Yeah, exactly. So with that being said, none of my yous are ever really mean.
Really?
Yeah.
Okay, interesting.
Wait, so you've never written an angry you in a death metal song?
I just don't really write angry music. I don't really write angry lyrics. That's the weird thing. Like any angry thing that I write about always also has like this sense of like you can overcome it, or you can change what's going on. It all comes from within. It's never really said with anger.
I mean, if you were to show your music to someone who wasn't a metal fan, they'd probably say this sounds very angry, right?
Oh, I mean, God, yeah, they comment that on my Instagram all the time.
Right. Because
you must be angry.
Well, you went viral recently a few times, right? You got retweeted by like a rapper.
I guess I never know who retweets me, but I do know that Drake followed us on Instagram.
Oh, wow.
It must have been a rapper. Yeah.
Well, there was one
But
on Twitter. There was like a video of you in the studio that I saw went
Oh yeah. I can't remember who that was, but anyway, yeah, it's like that's how I know that my videos have gone viral, is if I start singing or seeing comments like, she's really pissed off. She must be really mad. But yeah, of course,
Mhm.
people are going to take it as anger. I mean, but I can't change what they think about it, because a lot of people who are keyed into metal don't take it that way.
Right.
Yeah, for sure.
So it kind of goes back to what I was saying about when the album's out in the world, it's everyone else's. And however they want to interpret that, I can't stop any of that. So it just isn't something that can bother me, because I just like things out of my control. I don't sure if I tried to have control over those things, it would just make me angry.
Ironically, I suppose.
Yeah. Ironically.
Okay. So then just broadly, what do you think brought about the increased use of you on the new album?
I have no idea.
Okay.
I have no idea. That's fascinating.
Interesting. Well, we often like pose these kind of questions and people don't necessarily know what the response is at the moment. But we do often get like, messages and stuff from people like, a week or several months later being like, oh, I actually have a thought on this now. So if you have such a thought, let us know.
Yeah, I will.
It's always interesting.
Because here's the thing is that rarely as lyricists do we like go fully in depth talking about our lyrics. So you guys are asking questions that people have never really asked me. So it's cool to have a chance to think on these things, but to answer them right away, I'd have to think them out for sure.
Well, there's not even always a reason. Like we ask every question assuming we prepare every question and ask it assuming there's a reason and assuming there's an intent, because if there is, it's very interesting. But oftentimes there isn't. That's fine too.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah.
Well, picking up with something that you said earlier about like, a lot of your songs not necessarily being angry, at least in terms of the actual like content. So even if there is like, a song that could have, I don't know, kind of angry components, if you like, there's always kind of a positive kind of component to it as well, given that, you were saying that like oftentimes there's kind of a focus on how, challenges or difficulties can be overcome. Is there a reason why you try to kind of embed or go back to this kind of positive perspective in a lot of your songs?
Yeah, I mean, I think that it all comes like, so the name of our band is Entheos, right? It's the root word for enthusiasm. It's a Greek word and it means the God within. So I look at that as you are the God within. You can create your own reality. And that's kind of how, that's what all of our lyrics have always been based on. And that's really the root of it. That's the root of the positivity, is that I really believe that people can achieve really great things if they want to, but it all has to come from within. And that's why I focus on the positive parts of life, because I think that there's a lot of beauty to life, and a lot of people focus on a lot of negative things that happen in the world. And I want to promote the focus on all of the good that there is. And I just thinking of the fact that we're all going to die, there's a bigger picture here than like the minuscule things that happen every single day. There's like material objects and all of that stuff, like getting money and bragging about all of that stuff. That can be cool, but it's not like the meaning of life. It's not why we're here. And that's really what I like to explore, and why I focus on the positivity in life, because there are a lot of places you can look in metal where you can focus on the negativity, even if it's just for theatrics. And that's just not my vibe. I want to focus on growth and exploration and the good in people, and the interconnection of people and minds, and how we can all help each other grow. And that's what's really important to me. So that's definitely why that positive outlook is there.
I don't think we've had a discussion of positive outlooks very much so far. That's kind of interesting to hear.
It's relatively uncommon, yeah.
Yeah.
I'm kind of surprised to hear that, but also not.
Well, we've had people say that they want people to have positive impressions after listening to the music, but I don't think we've had many discussions of people that want like positivity in the theming of their lyrics so much.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think more discussion around like the value of confronting kind of the negative aspects of life, that kind of thing. Like, so indirect positivity, I suppose, has been a bit more common.
Totally.
Have you ever had any like pushback? Anyone be like, you need to, this is metal, you need to be more dour,
brutal or whatever.
Yeah, frown more.
Never.
No.
maybe like in my first band.
Okay.
I did. I had the little, but no. I usually feel pretty free in my expression, and if people like the lyrics, then that's fucking awesome. But I've always been about those kind of lyrics. Like, I like to read Alan Watts, and like if you read cynic lyrics or death lyrics, they're all introspective and philosophical and about growth and becoming a better person, or dealing with the aspects that come in life, the bigger picture aspects, and that type of stuff really inspires me. So that's kind of where I'm coming from.
So speaking of kind of bigger picture themes, one thing we also noticed across all your releases is that there's a lot of metaphors and imagery of nature. So the Infinite Nothing has a few, but they're kind of restricted to space. The words sun, earth, and void each appear 5 to 6 times. These words all appear on Dark Future, but a bit less, 3 to 4 times. But now we have 5 uses of sea, 2 of waves, and 4 of stars. And then 3 skies and references to tectonic shifts, autumn and winter. And on the new release, we have 3 instances of waves, 1 ocean, 2 seas, 5 earths, 2 fire, 2 flame, 4 voids, 6 suns or sunlight. What kind of draws you specifically to these themes of the void, the ocean, the earth, the sun? Is the motivation for each different?
No, I think it's just honestly focusing on the greater picture. And I've noticed that about myself, and going back through my lyrics, I've noticed that I focus on all of those things and have thought about that. And yeah, it really all comes back to the bigger, grander picture of life. And those things all are symbolic of that.
Even the void?
Yeah. Isn't the void significant of certain aspects of life that you can get into? Like depression feels like the void. And that's a very big picture thing as well.
Well, your second album, Dark Futures, seems to be specifically about humans and their relationship to the planet. Most bluntly, in the ending line, "Without us, the earth will abide and endure. Without her, however, we could never be." We could not even be. What inspired this kind of framing for the album?
I guess that I don't know. I guess that it was just getting into like, I don't really know what inspired it. I guess that it was just being out in nature a lot. I spent a lot of time in nature during that time in my life. I lived like right next to the ocean, and I wrote a lot of it on cliffs in Santa Cruz. And that really was a huge inspiration for that album. And just seeing, how I had a really good friend who committed suicide before I started writing that record. So I think that set me off into kind of seeing, the way that humans and the earth work together, and just life in general.
Well, yeah, I suppose building on that, like the final line is fairly straightforward for your lyrical style as a whole. Like there's no metaphor, no depiction of a scene. It's just a really kind of raw, straightforward statement that the earth will outlive us, but we will not outlive the earth. Did you find it kind of more kind of liberating, or more kind of difficult to have such a straightforward, message in a song like that?
I think that's liberating. I think the line in itself is liberating, just knowing that the earth, that, like I said, I focus on that a lot. We're all going to die. So that having that line was super liberating to put there. It's just a flat out easy way to say it. It's similar to "Time Will Take Us All." I like bold lines like that make you feel when you read them.
Well, that actually kind of links to the next question we're going to ask, because I'd say broadly, we thought that your lyrical composition is, it obviously doesn't read like a daily conversation, but the vocabulary you've used is, I'd say, mostly what people would consider familiar. Lines like, you filled your pit with misery, so turn the page, or fade into blackness until you break free. That's clearly a poetic form, but the words are things that the average English speaker user would certainly recognize. Is having language that is kind of accessible something that is intentional, or did it just kind of happen organic? Like, did you consider balancing a more unusual lyrical structure with this kind of familiar language?
I have definitely considered that, because I think that on our first EP and on our first album, there were parts where I'm like, I think that a lot of the time, like, technical metal can get caught up in its usage of big words that don't necessarily always mean anything to the people who read them, though they might mean something to the lyricist. So it's been something that I've definitely aimed to do over time, to use familiar language, because that's what I think that people resonate with. There's like a saying where things are supposed to be like 80% familiar and 20% non-familiar, and that's what works. Or maybe it's even 90% familiar. But yeah, it's something that I've definitely aimed to do more over time, because like I said, I want people, if they do choose to read the lyrics, I want them to at least be able to find something within them. And if you're using too many crazy like scientific words, I think that can become like get really lost on people.
Do you think that the emotional impact is greater if you use kind of more familiar language? Like, do you think that, reading lines like the ones we've just, talked about is, I suppose, like a little bit more, I don't know, impactful, I guess is the best way I can think of to say it, than if you were to read them in language that kind of reads as more kind of like technical or obtuse?
Absolutely. I mean, I think that like super poetic lines that are using like pretty words you can relate to really easily, but this usage of scientific words are hard to relate to. I mean, I can't relate to them. So yeah, I definitely think that when you kind of use more familiar stuff, when you're using analogies that people understand, that yeah, it just, I mean, it's similar to like pop music, honestly, even though obviously I'm not writing like the pop music of lyrics. Why is pop music so accessible? It's because everyone understands it right when they hear it. It's like, if it gets a little weird, if it's jazz, well, that's not quite as accessible. And that's how words can be. You can write like jazzy wordage and it won't really make sense to people, and then you can write it a little more, straight laced, and it makes sense.
We've talked to some people in, especially in more proggy technical styles, that have talked about kind of enjoying the big difficult words, like looking them up and learning vocabulary, or saying that it kind of, since the music is kind of complex, the lyrics also need to be complex. Are these statements you've never identified with? Like when you were a kid flipping through a lyric book, finding a new word, like, ooh, that's a cool word. Is that something that never happened? Or is it something that you've just kind of faded away from over time?
I've always just related more to lyrics that weren't like that. And like I said, I like, that is what gets an emotional reaction out of me. There are some words that are great to look up. I mean, I'm trying to think of a word that would be, but like, when it comes to weird, crazy big words, I don't necessarily, that's not really my thing as much. I like, for instance, I came from like reading Sylvia Plath and stuff like that. I like poetry that kind of lays it out there. Not that I don't like looking up a word or learning a new word, but I really like to read things and relate to them. Like, or if you read Jacob Bannon's lyrics from Converge, you're not most of the time having to run to a dictionary to see what stuff means. Maybe sometimes, which is fine, but a lot of the time you can just read it, take it in, and you know what it means. And those are just the lyrics that appeal more to me. I mean, some of my friends write lyrics that are about like, monsters and whatever, and that's their thing, but it's not my thing.
Have you ever felt any pressure, like even when you were younger, that like, oh, this is, all these other bands are writing about scientific medical language. I need to do that too, to be like, to compete in the lyrical marketplace?
The lyrical marketplace. Not really. No,
Okay.
I haven't really felt that. Maybe I let it rub off on me for a while, but not like to a crazy degree. Because I have this list here of like, I've been thinking about the lyricists who have inspired me. And as I'm looking at their names, it's like, yeah, most of them don't use like crazy, huge technical words and stuff. So I look to those vocalists more for like pattern placement.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yeah. Well, like elaborating further on this theme, one kind of stylistic change that we noted across your albums, the last one we'll talk about, I think, is that the new album has a number of tracks that use kind of fairly short monosyllabic terms. So, for instance, the line with the highest syllables in Perpetual Miscalculations is further into a predetermined annihilation with 14 syllables across 5 words. If we compare this to your new single, I Am the Void, the longest line has 16 syllables, but across 12 words. In I Can Feel the Sunlight Draining, us all every day is nothing. No word in the song has more than 3 syllables, comparison to predetermined annihilation that we mentioned earlier. And of the 191 words on the track 171, so just over 89% are monosyllabic. So while this isn't an absolute, other songs are kind of similar, like Oblivion has 169 words and 158, so 93.4% are monosyllabic. And in Purgatory, the only 4-syllable word in a song title on the album, you have 334 words, which has 299 monosyllabic words, so 86% or so. So compare this to Melancholia, which is obviously 5 syllables from your second album. You have 313 words, but 254 are monosyllabic, so kind of 81%, or Sea of Symmetry with 267 words, 216 of which are monosyllabic. So again, 81%. Are you at all surprised to hear that there's, say, like an increase of like about 10% or so in your use of monosyllabic words? Or is this kind of like more or less just a continuation of what we've kind of already discussed regarding, your desire for striking but simple lyrics?
It is definitely a continuation from what we discussed, but I am super surprised to hear that. That's a fascinating fact. But it totally makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
Wow.
You definitely have continued to strive for increased I guess simplicity is a loaded term, but like I guess go back accessibility to go back, I think.
Yeah, definitely. It's never really simplistic, but definitely accessible, just because I also want to go back to my lyrics 10 years from now and remember exactly what I was talking about. I enjoy that. So I like that it's laid out a little more simplistic. Granted, it's not like when we're talking about pop music compared to what I do, it's not that
apples
simplistic.
and oranges.
Yeah, exactly. But yeah, it's fascinating to hear that because it's totally in line. Wow.
So just as kind of like a little thought experiment, the music video for your new single mentions it's, quote, about the weight of feeling as though you cannot escape your own fears and anxieties. Do you think the impact of the song or its theme would change if you use, say, weighty words to express this kind of weighty feeling? Why use light, short words to express weight?
I don't know. I don't think that it would change. I think that there are probably songs like in Black Static, which is kind of a similar concept. I feel like I use a little weightier words in that song. So no, I don't really feel like the weight of the song is determined by the weight of the words per se. Yeah, did that answer
Yeah, but I guess I'll tweak it a bit further. Like, could you have a song that's mostly monosyllabic words that feels light?
I mean, yeah, potentially, right?
Potentially.
I don't know why you couldn't. I don't know why you couldn't. Anything is possible as far as writing goes, I think. What do you think?
I mean, I'm a little surprised, I guess, to be honest. Like, I've never, for instance, I don't know any like Carcass songs that feel light, you know?
Yeah. Right.
I suppose it's like you say it's possible, yeah, but I guess I wrote the question with the assumption that words with more syllables tended to feel heavier. Maybe that's flawed, but
which is also potentially a linguist way of thinking about it, because we're thinking about moral weight and that kind of thing. Like,
yeah, I mean, potentially thinking of words like that. Yeah, you've got, but I don't know. Does a word like transcendence sound weighty? Because that to me doesn't sound weighty.
For me, it does. Yeah.
Really?
Yeah. Compared to like, is there a synonym that's shorter? Like thought. I don't know. Exalt.
That being said, though, like just to like completely contradict my co-host here, I guess.
Please
like,
go ahead.
I'm
Absolutely.
thinking like, you know, if we could take a monosyllabic word like fuck, that doesn't feel light to me. Like that does feel like quite heavy, but I think that's because of the impact that I associate with it. So I can kind of see where you're coming from here, that like the syllable, like the amount of syllables doesn't necessarily like correlate with like the weight we might like assign a given word.
Yeah, exactly. It's the weight that we have assigned a word. To me, that takes precedence over how many syllables it has, because they're all words have preconceived notions about them.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So like, you can't.
It's hard to separate that out. Yeah.
Exactly. And I wish that I could think of a really good word that had a bunch of syllables in it that demonstrates the point. But I can't off the top of my head. You've got me on this.
Well, that's not my goal. It's not gotcha. It's just I'm surprised. Like if someone came up to me and said, "All right, we're going to talk about transcendence," I'd be like, "Okay, this is a heavy conversation."
That's true. You are right. You are right about that.
Where someone's like, "We're going to talk about like feeling better than normal," I'd be like, "Okay."
Yeah, that's true. You have a good point for sure. That's one that I'm going to think on and probably message you guys about after.
We'll re-upload with a little like edit of one of it, like text to speech reading the message.
Exactly.
Okay. All right. So we'll put a pin in that one, I guess. It just it did surprise me though, because I did actually like this unprepared conversation does lead into what we prepared for the next question. So according to an article we read online, you study both philosophy and psychology in university. And these are definitely fields that are known for rather esoteric terminology. So, and of course, metal is itself. Is there any motive in kind of pushing back at the inaccessibility of these styles and how you write lyrics? Like, is it possible? Like, is there a resistance of maybe reading a bad article that was written too thick? Because, you know, we've done that all the time as academics ourselves. Or is there any push back against metal itself having this kind of impression of, oh, you need to be esoteric?
There's no like purposeful pushback at all. But maybe it is because I think that there are a lot of words that are used in both of those fields that like the layman wouldn't be able to really understand without a little work. And I enjoy that there's some understanding to those words. So perhaps I could see why I subconsciously could have done that. But yeah, there's no purposeful thing behind it.
Okay. All right, just spitballing.
Yeah, it's just interesting because obviously you have access to all of this like you know terminology that you could potentially integrate into like lyrics, but I've obviously chosen not to do that.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that I did more at the beginning. It goes back to that self-auditing thing. Like I would read through those lyrics and be like, how can we say this in an easier, a way that's a little more obvious, but not completely literal.
Yeah. And I think like as academics, we can certainly recognize like the importance of that skill and how difficult that skill is to like execute effectively. So
Right.
explaining a complex idea in a way that's like really simple for any person to understand is actually really difficult a lot of the time. So
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Have you ever gone too easy? Have you ever like made something simpler and been like, oh, I need to pull that back? It's actually just, it's too
like
straightforward now?
oversimplifying.
Yeah.
Only by my own standards, but then I'll run things across Naveen, and I'm trying to think of something that I've done that with. But I'll run it across Naveen, and he isn't, he hasn't studied philosophy and he's not a linguist and all of this stuff. So he will be like, no, you got to keep that simple pattern, because I'll overanalyze my lyrics a lot. Like, I think of these things a lot. Am I being a little too obvious with that? Does that need to be said in a more complicated way? So I like to run it across him, because I do think that a lot of people are more casual metal listeners who maybe if I lay it out a little clearer, they'll understand a little more, or they'll relate to it a little easier. Because I do think that there are times when lyricists get caught a little too much up in what we're talking about, in the fun of someone discovering a new word in their lyrics and going off to learn about it. Like, people will go way too far into that. And then I think that completely takes you out of, like, for me, I can't relate to those lyrics at all. So though I'm not drawn to bands like that. So I try to be the opposite of that to some, well, not the total opposite, but to a certain extent.
Well, further on the subject of things that don't exist in your lyrics, you don't seem to be a fan of rhyme or swearing, because we couldn't really find much of either. At most, it looks like you'll allow one rhyme on a song. The Interior Wilderness has "So I lay in a cold bed carved from stone to rest my head." But that's it. And I Am the Void has a universe inside of me still I can't see. But again, that's kind of the extent of it. And this is even visible on prior albums too. So is this, again, like intentional for you? Did you kind of like move away from or avoid rhyme on purpose?
I don't avoid it on purpose. I just, if a line calls for it, then I'll do it. But some lines I just think sound, I guess, weird or cheesy if they rhyme too much. So I'll stay away from it a lot of the time. As far as cussing, I do not like to cuss in music. It's just something I've always sort of had an aversion to. Like, it's just not my style to go to like say fuck, or I always think that there's a better word to find to explain what I'm talking about. So yeah, that's a super conscious choice, but it's cool for other people. I'm not against it in other people's music. There's an element of like, I don't know. For me, I just feel sort of immature. Like, there's immaturity to it if I do that.
Like, do you swear in like your everyday life at all, or generally not? Okay.
I mean, you swore more in this podcast than on your entire discography.
Yeah, exactly. I was gonna say I probably have sworn like a sailor on this. I swear so much in real life, but I think that it's because, I was so into English when I was a kid, and then studying that stuff and just being a fan of reading. And I don't know. I don't like throwing that stuff in albums for some reason.
Well, I guess given that you're a fan of, fan of literature, fan of reading, I guess I'm kind of want to go back to the rhyme thing. You'd expect someone that's a big reader to, be into rhyme a little bit, right? I guess in theory, or is this is another one of my, thoughts that isn't actually real?
I guess it depends on what kind of like reading you're into. I like poetry that doesn't necessarily rhyme. I like abstract poetry, not rhymes most of the time. Yeah, it's just never really been my thing, I guess. But like I said, some rhyming sounds really sick, and I'll definitely throw that in. But yeah, it can sound cheesy.
When a line calls for it, what makes a line call for a rhyme?
That's a good question. I don't know. If I hear it and I think, I guess the line, I don't know. I have no freaking idea. I have no idea what calls for it. It's just like if I hear it, it's some aspect of hearing it, and I'm like, the next line, just if it rhymes, it's gonna sound good. There's no rhyme or reason.
So with the rhymes you have written though, then did they come out like you were just writing? It's like, oh, there's a rhyme there, cool. Or are there times when you've been like, oh, this could rhyme. I should put a rhyme in there.
Yeah, no, it was I think it was I should put a rhyme in there. Like I'd give it all to pay my due. It won't be long till this night is through. That line just, I guess the riff just made me think that it needed a rhyme to it.
Well, that was what I was going to ask, because it has more to do with like, you know, the melody or riffs that you're kind of working with. Does that kind of drive you to include a rhyme?
Yeah, totally.
So again, thought experiment. If you had a song, like if you took one of the songs that you've written and every single stanza or whatever rhymed, like, you know, A, B, or A, B, 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 whatever you want to do, would you think that would just make the song feel really silly to you?
No, well, every single one, maybe. I've definitely found myself listening to songs that have like that going on, and I'm like, I wish that they would kind of stray away from this a little bit, because but I don't know, like with everything else we've talked about, it really depends on the song. I mean, some stuff sounds better rhymed, but a lot of the time in metal it's cheesy. A lot of the time it is.
Okay.
It just depends.
I think me and Jess are going to hit up the same question, which is just kind of tie all this together. What would you say broadly is the role then of lyrics in your band's music? And more broadly, what do you think is the role of language and lyrics in the extreme metal genre that we, all enjoy?
The role of lyrics in my band is definitely like the tying of everything together. Just like vocals. Like I find the lyrics to be a pretty important aspect of my band. They determine the way the art looks. You know, all of our imagery is based on those words. So, and to a large extent, the music is shaped by those lyrics. So, you know, if there are lines that I think should be drawn out, then I'll have Naveen repeat riffs, and we work that way. So it's really important. It plays a big role in my band and the way that my band appears. And what was the other question? Was it how they apply in metal?
Yeah, more broadly, what do you think is the role of lyrics in this genre? That, like, you know, I guess the kind of impetus behind the question is that a lot of people that aren't fans of our genre listen to it and just think it all sounds like noise, right? So why even say anything? What is the purpose of language in a genre that kind of often hides what's being said?
Yeah, I mean, the thing is that if we determined all of life that way by like, oh, well, when I do this, half of the people think that I'm doing it because of that, then most things just like wouldn't even matter. So I think that lyrics play a huge role in metal. The outsiders, for them, yes, it's a noise, it's a primal noise. And if they care to dig deeper into the lyrics, then they will, and they'll find something. But broadly, over metal, lyrics mean a ton of different things. Some bands, you know, in hardcore, a lot of it is like, you know, taking control and you can't get me down and shit like that. And then there are political lyrics, and there are progressive metal lyrics. There are concept albums that tell stories. There are like theatrical Cannibal Corpse lyrics that are about kill, that are more horror movie stuff. So I think that they cover like they have a super broad meaning throughout metal. And I think they're very important. Maybe someone else would say that they aren't, but in bands that I care about their lyrics to a great degree. And I can assure you that there are a bunch of fans like me who are dying to learn the lyrics, or a line catches their ear and they're like, okay, now I have to get into this person's lyrics because that one line was amazing. And there are a lot of people in metal writing super meaningful lyrics. So I think it's like the coolest genre for lyrics, honestly. I mean, So I think it's really important. Plays a huge role.
Well, obviously we agree.
Yeah. Or we wouldn't be doing this. Yeah.
Yeah.
Totally.
Well, thank you so much for taking the time to talk to us. So this, as we mentioned, is currently scheduled to come out just a little bit before your album drops. Where can people go though to listen to it when it's out there in the world, when it's ours and not yours anymore?
Yeah, when it belongs to all of you.
Yeah.
Check us out on social media. Go into Google, type in Entheos. You can find all of our stuff: TikTok, Instagram, YouTube, Facebook. We're on it all. If you want to know anything more about the lyrics, then just hit me up and I will gladly send you messages about it. I love talking about it. So, and it was very cool to do this podcast as well, because like I said, a lot of people don't like, when I'm doing interviews, it's very much about, okay, how'd the band form? How'd you get to this? What's the album overall about? No one goes through and finds like connections between the albums. So it's really cool to do this. But yeah,
thank you.
Thank you guys for doing it. So yeah, all those places, and Metal Blade's website, most importantly, go pre-order an album.
Well, we'll definitely have that link in our description for this episode, so you can go and find that really easy.
And I guess we should caution anyone that does Google you, though, that the Entheos that is on Encyclopedia Metallum is not you.
No, it's not. We are not. I've actually contacted them about this. We, believe it or not, are not metal enough to be on that site. We're too progressive.
Oh, I'm sure it's a very, mathematical standard that they have that.
Yeah, very scientific.
Very scientific. Yeah, I'm sure that we couldn't find anyone on that site that's not just, objectively metal. Absolutely.
I know. It's fascinating to me. They don't. Well, and also makes me happy. Between the Buried in Me is not on there, and neither is the Contortionist. So I feel like we're in good company. Yeah, we're all too prog. It's weird.
There's some. I do a bit of research on Japanese metals at the moment, and there's a Japanese like grindcore band, and they're not allowed because they incorporate Japanese drums, and so they're too experimental. And it's like it's a guy with a guitar and a bunch of drummers screaming, grindcore, but the drums aren't like they have the traditional drums, but they also have like taiko. And I found like the forum post be like, no, they're not allowed. It's too experimental. It's not metal enough. It's like what? I don't understand. A very useful website. We don't want to slag them.
Absolutely. It's been useful, but some of those decisions do seem a bit arbitrary, especially because like by that logic, then what is sonic not metal? Like because they use traditional instruments. Yeah.
Yeah, I know. It's super arbitrary. But yeah, it is a good tool. They have, on the other hand, like 1 million metal bands on there that are from 1,000 years ago, so you can find pretty much anything on there. Except but you are on there. Yeah, everyone in my band is on there. That's
you have a profile, but when they click active bands, your band link doesn't go anywhere.
Yeah, I know. It's so dumb, so stupid. Well, whatever. We're gonna overcome that Encyclopedia Metallum. You can't stop us.
So
well,
eventually.
This episode is here as proof. You're on Lingua Britannica, a metal.
Which is podcast, we only interview certified metal bands. So there you go.
Certified metal. There we go.
Absolutely. Yeah. Well, great. Okay. Cool. Yeah. Thank you very much. That was amazing. Awesome. Appreciate your time. Yeah, I can't wait to hear the full album. The single's been amazing. So really looking forward to seeing it like in a whole kind of package.
Oh yeah, I can't wait for you to hear it, man. Hell yeah. Cool. All right, have a good night, you guys.
Take care. Peace.
See ya.
Thank you for listening to Lingua Britannica. We hope you enjoyed it, and we hope you stay tuned for our next episode. Before we leave, we just wanted to acknowledge that this podcast is recorded on the unceded lands of the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nation and the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation. We pay respects to their elders, past and present.